news. Great political machinations going on in Islamabad this weekend. Could you summarise what is the current situation?
Well, there appears to be constitutional and political crisis in one of its worst form in Pakistan. Under the Constitution of Pakistan, there had to be voting today to decide on whether or not Prime Minister Imran Khan is going to stay in power. The opposition parties apparently had all the numbers to oust him, but the speaker, the deputy speaker of the lower house of the parliament, he ruled that the opposition parties are in collusion with the USA to topple a government in Pakistan, and therefore it is a question of the integrity of the state of Pakistan. Therefore, he said, since it is a conspiracy to topple the government hatched by a foreign country in league with opposition parties, therefore he has given his own judgment. Under this judgment, instead of holding voting inside the parliament, he had given judgment that this voting process is rejected. So after that, the Prime Minister's powers to dissolve the parliament was restored, and under those constitutional powers, he advised the President of Pakistan to dissolve the parliament. As we speak, the parliament now stands dissolved. The reason Prime Minister decided to go to the public to hold a new fresh election within 90 days is because of major factor is that he thinks that he has become popular once again, though he was unpopular a month ago because of the unprecedented price hike. But now the bigger question among the people in Pakistan is whether USA can be allowed again and again to interfere into Pakistan's affair, to change the regime in Pakistan. I think given the fact that there has been unprecedented anti-American sentiments in Pakistan in the past, given the fact those anti-American sentiments have revived after Prime Minister made it public that the Pakistan's ambassador to Washington a month ago was summoned by the US officials, and he was told that if Prime Minister Imran Khan's government is not toppled through a no confidence motion, Pakistan will have to face consequences. Now, Prime Minister Imran Khan says it is a question of Pakistan's integrity and sovereignty. Therefore, it comes first. That letter, that communication, that cable was presented before National Security Council, which was attended by the Services Chief of Pakistan Armed Forces. And all they have reached to a conclusion about this conspiracy that this is interference into Pakistan's affairs, and US top diplomat was also summoned by Pakistan's Foreign Office, and he was conveyed these concerns of Pakistan. In that context, I think today there appears to be deviation from the constitutional process. The Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly did not have those powers, but he has jumped up and he said since the first loyalty of the MPs and the citizens of Pakistan has to be with the state of Pakistan, and since they are in collusion with the foreign country, therefore he has ruled to basically block this voting process. Now everything has landed with the Supreme Court of Pakistan, and I think today or tomorrow it is going to come up with a judgment which may not be very favorable to the Prime Minister Imran Khan, because there was a deviation from the constitutional process, and Supreme Court could possibly reverse that the ruling of the Speaker of the National Assembly, though the government insists that under the Constitution of Pakistan, the judgment of a speaker and the ruling of the speaker cannot be called into a question by any court of law.
A very tense situation, of course. Now, the interesting thing as well is that, as you say, the dissolution of the parliament means that there will have to be an election in 90 days. So that gives Imran Khan the chance to let the people decide, as he said, let the people decide who they want in power, not the authority of a foreign power to do that. But if the no confidence votes were to be allowed to go ahead, and if Imran Khan were to be ousted through that, wouldn't that put things in the same situation, that an election would still have to be held at some time in the future? What is the difference between these two positions?
I think if the voting process had allowed to happen, the Prime Minister Imran Khan would have certainly ousted and booted out. There is no doubt about it. The number game is with the opposition parties. The government has been blaming the opposition parties that they have won over the loyalties of the members of the ruling party by greasing their palms, by paying them millions of US dollars. Some of the members of the ruling party say that this money has been provided by the USA. But I really doubt this may or may not have happened, but the opposition parties are known to be allegedly very corrupt. They have siphoned off huge money they can pay on their own. But here bigger question is there are two things which are happening now. The original plan has been to bring a pro-US, a leader who's the opposition leader, Shehbaz Sharif, and the opposition parties have their known credentials of being pro-US. There have been their scandals on how what many believe they try to sell Pakistan's interest to the Western countries. There have been so many scandals. In that context, I think the American plan to bring its own man in Pakistan in immediate future, that has collapsed. Opposition parties had tasted back-end support of Pakistan's military, the generals of which are known to be pro-USA. They had their military training in the USA, and Pakistan's top political elites, retired military generals, they have their properties in the USA and other Western destinations. Therefore, they are pro-USA. But now situation is changing. Prime Minister Imran Khan wants to have independent foreign policy in a country where the ruling elite are known to be pro-US, in a country where more than 80,000 people have died because of participating in so-called US war against terror. There are unprecedented anti-American sentiments in Pakistan which have been revived since Prime Minister Imran Khan made it public that this is a conspiracy hatched by the USA. But the bigger trouble is that the military is not supporting Prime Minister Imran Khan the way it used to be some 4 or 5 months back, because military believes that if Prime Minister Imran Khan stays in power, I mean, this is their back-end understanding, that means that the Americans can give Pakistan a very tough time, something they have given warning to Pakistan's ambassador that if Prime Minister Imran Khan stays in power, Pakistan will have to face consequences. And those consequences are that the Pakistan of exports to the Western destinations could be affected. European Union can block it, USA can block it. So I think those are the problems because of which the military, some of the military generals have apprehensions. But generally in Pakistan, the public wave is in favor of Prime Minister Imran Khan. And I still believe that within the military, Prime Minister Imran Khan enjoys a huge support because there is no such allegations of going against Pakistan's interest. He is a man who's known to be having a foreign policy, something which has been missing in Pakistan for last 3 decades. So there is a somewhat 2016-like situation of what happened in Turkey. Their military, backed by the USA, had directly intervened. Here, the Pakistan's opposition parties try to play a constitutional game by having the back-end support of the military, by having the back-end support of the USA. As a matter of fact, according to reports here in Pakistani media, it was a decision made by President Joe Biden in its National Security Council meeting, and that decision was conveyed to Pakistan's ambassador through US Undersecretary of State for South Asia. And since then, I think the Pakistan has been into crisis. This is for the first time that a strong resistance is being put against US military, against US intervention into Pakistani affairs. This is something which never happened before in Pakistan. It happened slightly, somewhat in late 70s, but now situation has changed, and it seems that it will be very difficult for now Americans to have their own man in place on the seat of the Prime Minister in Pakistan.
It sounds like another failure for America to understand the needs of a far-off country and to work with somebody who's been an international player for many years. Imran Khan's a name I remember from my childhood, so he understands how the world thinks and would surely be a wise person to work with. Now, where do you just finally where do you see this going in the coming months? Will we see a new election in 90 days?
I think opposition parties are desperate to be in power. Partly, USA wants that to happen, and partly there is internal division within the opposition parties. Some of the leaders, they want to become a prime minister. They would not get that kind of opportunity again. But another bigger issue is that the Prime Minister Imran Khan can still stay in power for next 2 weeks at least as interim prime minister, and the Americans are very upset because Prime Minister visited Russia at a time when Russia had invaded Ukraine. And Prime Minister Imran Khan was not listening to the Americans. He was publicly saying that there was a defeat of the Americans from Afghanistan, something Americans did not like. Americans wanted once again to have military bases in Pakistan, something he said he would never allow that to happen. Pakistan military is known to be playing on all sides. They wanted to strike balance. Prime Minister Imran Khan is a very blunt, and he wants to play very straight. He doesn't want to go into any particular bloc. He wants to have an independent foreign policy. In Pakistan, in somebody who tries to have an independent foreign policy, that is being misconstrued that as if Pakistan is joining a Chinese or Russian bloc. Though Pakistan's tilt is obviously towards China, because China has invested tens of billions of US dollars in Pakistan, unlike the US, which wants to keep Pakistan's economy always in a failed syndrome. They want to keep Pakistan economy to be dependent onto the West. Prime Minister Imran Khan knows this, and I think Americans apprehended that perhaps Prime Minister in league with the Chinese and Russian president, they want to divert from the dollar. That means it would be big setback to the American economy, because Prime Minister Imran Khan also enjoys support from the Saudi Arabia and UAE. They have also turned their back to the USA. They want Chinese currency to be used to purchase oil. So I think in that context, Americans had fears that the leaders like Prime Minister Imran Khan, who's a fearless, who's independent, he can give tough time. He is the man who spent decades in the West. He understands the West better than so many Pakistani opposition leaders who are, very impressed by everything that the West has. He doesn't get impressed because he knows best better than anybody else. He wants to have a very balanced policy, but I think that is something which the military is not understanding. That is something the opposition parties do not want to understand, because they don't have that kind of political insight. Their political interests are interlinked with the Western destinations. They have their properties there. They have all their interests there. Therefore, I think the Prime Minister Imran Khan is having a tough time. But at the same time, the silver lining is that he has most recently, just few weeks back, he has won the district elections, local body elections in northwest of Pakistan. That is an indication that the public mood in Pakistan is fast changing in favor of Prime Minister Imran Khan, and there are intelligence reports suggesting that he could possibly be assassinated. Everybody knows in Pakistani context that so many Pakistani top leaders, president, prime ministers, they were directly or indirectly assassinated by the Americans through their moles in Pakistan. I hope that is not repeated. It seems probably this would not be repeated. This is not 70s. This is 2022. Situation has changed. And there is more public resentment against Americans because media is open. People know what is going on. Unlike in 1970s, when a prime minister was assassinated through the military in a kind of in an extrajudicial manner through a fake proceeding in the Supreme Court of Pakistan. Now I think the situation is going to change altogether.
Well, we'll be watching very closely, and to use a cricketing term, I'm sure this isn't over just yet. Javed Rana, thank you so much for joining us here today on A News and giving us that expert analysis. Thank you.
The growing tide of anti-Israel sentiments. What you see behind me is just tip of the iceberg of what is happening in the country. More than half of $52 billion black CIA budget is spent on espionage network in Pakistan. How would you handle it?
The US has looked upon Pakistan as an ally at one point and then as an enemy at the same time.
That is going to be the first legal reason on the basis of which he is going to be instantly ousted by the Supreme Court of Pakistan.
Joining us live, Javed Rana, who's an expert on politics and geostrategic issues.
In the world politics, which is not being driven by any moral principle, it is being driven by the hard geostrategic realities. In a broader picture, more countries would aspire to have nuclear weapons.